As we look to see what consumers are doing this year, one way to predict how spending may look is to take a trip back to a few weeks ago and see how spending was affected in 2021 in the holiday season. So unfortunately, as expected, the holidays were different again in 2021. And although almost all reported figures were expected to improve over last year compared to prior years, gathering, traveling, and gifting were still under indexing. Economic concerns about inflation and supply chains have risen, driving consumers to shop even earlier last year. And despite some rather optimistic forecasts by the National Retail Foundation and others, nearly 7 in 10 people expected to spend the same amount as in prior years. So I will be the first to admit that I did some shopping earlier, but the majority of my shopping occurred just a few days before. And though some consumers completed the majority of their holiday shopping around Thanksgiving, there was still time to get them in the door by focusing on the December deals and sales. And this may be the new norm, with holiday shopping beginning as early as October to get ahead of any issues like inflation and out of stock. Consumers still hold a bit of power to not buy or be brand loyal on the big sale days, and perhaps wait until absolutely something is needed or has a better price elsewhere. 35% of consumers cite that if a product they want is unavailable, they will switch to a similar product. However, with supply chain issues ever present, consumers were forced to make these purchases sooner rather than later. Now, are there any avid puzzlers out there? I will be the first to admit that I got into puzzling through quarantine, and every time I go back to my parents' house, we do puzzles. And going back this holiday season, the first thing my mom said was that Rite Aid was out of puzzlers. So, pretty big deal. And Deloitte expected toys and games and electronics to be the top categories expected to be impacted by product shortages, and they were kind of spot on. Like the majority of consumers, I spend a lot of time cooking through the pandemic. You can see this black blob back here is my air fryer, and yes, I was one of those people that invested in an air fryer early on. However, the cooking craze seemed to be coming to a close, seeing as it was the least likely to gift items this past holiday season. Consumers were more focused on gift cards, clothing and toys, and hobbies. And though more consumers were likely to purchase gifts among those three categories, the average spend is expected to be the highest for clothing accessories, followed by electronics. And that kind of goes back to what Gwen was saying, was that we're trying to, update our wardrobe as we go back to work. Leggings, yoga pants are not acceptable for some reason, so definitely more spending in that regard. On average, consumers were likely to spend around $300 on clothing and just under $250 on electronics. Now, although e-commerce and digital shopping is here to stay, consumers were more comfortable going into stores and browsing. Deloitte cited on average, consumers would visit around 6 stores, which was up from 5 in 2020. And with that being said, depending on what source you're using, folks were still nervous about shopping in store. Deloitte cited around 40% of consumers were still anxious about shopping in person due to COVID risks, which was actually down 11% from 2020. So definitely an improvement in in-store shopping as well. Now, I know I mentioned consumers have all the power, but as expected, Black Friday was a huge day for shopping. Even the consumers that didn't get up at the crack of dawn to get a somewhat decent deal were still able to go through the Thanksgiving weekend and shop. Whether it was online or in-store, consumers on average spent around $300, which is actually down 3% from 2020. And for the first time ever, Black Friday e-commerce sales did not increase. And it could be because shopping took place more spread out than previously, through the weekend, but definitely something to not ignore. Essentially, people expected to shop early, and they did. And as I mentioned earlier, the supply chain fiasco has been causing headaches across the board. No, out of stock isn't a new band name, though that would be a good one, but delayed messaging has been popping up more rapidly than it was pre-pandemic. Couple that with inflation, it's no wonder TJ Maxx and other discount realtors saw a huge in-store foot traffic. And I, a Maxxinista myself, can attest to how busy these stores were over the holidays. 2021 was certainly a better holiday season than 2020. However, it did not quite meet expectations set in months prior.